Monkey D. Luffy is known for his independent spirit and thirst for adventure, which was allowed to grow unchecked when he was raised by the easygoing Dadan. But what if Luffy's childhood influences were completely different? In today's video, we'll explore what would happen if Luffy was raised by 5 legends from One Piece. Let's start off with the most obvious pick, Luffy's father, Monkey D. Dragon. Dragon initially hands his son over to Garp as he's afraid of harming Luffy, but in this version of events, he decides to take his chances with the world government. In this version of events, Luffy grows up in Baltigo. He never meets Shanks and never dreams of being the Pirate King, because he already has a revolutionary role model to look up to, the worst criminal in the world. Under Dragon's guidance, Luffy grows up dreaming of freedom instead of treasure. He meets Sabo a bit later than the original timeline, and the two end up being sworn brothers. Luffy grows up learning to battle from Ivankov, Kuma, Hack, and many others. But this means he never forms his own crew of Straw Hat pirates, choosing to be an independent agent of the Revolutionary Army instead. Dragon lets his son act freely as long as Luffy does not risk the safety of the army itself. In this timeline, the members of the Straw Hats gradually end up in the Revolutionary Army. For example, Luffy decides to oppose Arlong's injustice and helps liberate Kokoyashi Village, motivating Nami to join his cause. Similarly, he goes against the Marines to rescue Zoro because of his disdain for corrupt laws. Now, Luffy's powers are severely held back, as he never trains under an advanced Haki user or eats the Gomu Gomu no Mi. However, it's highly likely that Luffy consumes the Mera Mera no Mi instead of Sabo, allowing him to fight with fire instead. But perhaps the most important change is in Luffy's final goal. He no longer wants the One Piece, but instead aims to take down the Celestial Dragons and liberate the world. We'll explore how Luffy's ambitions as a pirate may evolve much further if he's raised by someone else, like a certain red-haired pirate. But for our second character, let's follow the original timeline a bit more. In this version of events, when Monkey D. Garp receives Luffy from Dragon, he decides to raise his grandson to be a Marine, instead of passing him again over to Dadan. This time, Garp actually succeeds in selling Luffy the dream of becoming a Marine. Luffy would never meet Shanks, eat a devil fruit, or develop a dream of becoming the king of the pirates. Garp raises Luffy very strictly from a young age, with basic Haki training and lectures on the importance of justice. Luffy becomes far more disciplined, but still remains wild in his pursuit of justice, often getting into trouble with his superiors. During his early days in the Marines, Luffy is assigned to missions in East Blue, where he meets many of the early characters from the series. For example, instead of fighting Alvida as a pirate, he arrests her for her crimes. Luffy's encounter with Zoro is also different, as he's among the Marines when he's arrested by Helmeppo. However, Luffy opposes his superior officer and releases Zoro, earning the swordsman's respect. As the story progresses, Luffy reaches the rank of captain in time for the Alabasta arc. When the world government suspects Crocodile, he's sent undercover to Alabasta, where he uncovers the plans for Project Utopia and takes down Baroque Works. In this version of events, Nico Robin escapes instead of joining the Straw Hat Pirates, and the Marines save Alabasta, meaning that the people of the kingdom gain more faith in the world government. Luffy gains recognition as a hero, inching towards his grandfather's legacy. By the time we get to Marineford, Luffy's mastery of Haki and achievements on the battlefield have brought him to the rank of Vice Admiral. The war unfolds more or less the same, with Ace and Whitebeard losing their lives before Shanks arrives. Even though Luffy and Ace are not brothers, his inability to make a difference in the battle shows Luffy that he needs to grow much stronger, something he can no longer achieve while working on missions with the Marines. Luffy decides to go rogue, not as a pirate, but by joining Sword, where he can even challenge the 4 Emperors in his pursuit of justice. For our next legend, let's rewind back to when Luffy was just a toddler. In this alternate timeline, Dadan really does turn down Garp's request for her to raise Luffy, claiming that she has her hands full with Ace already. Instead, Garp runs into his old friend Silver's Rayleigh during a covert mission in East Blue. Also known as the Dark King, Rayleigh was the first mate of the Roger Pirates and retired from piracy following the death of Goldie Roger. Garp realizes that Rayleigh is both an incredible mentor and a pretty safe option given his semi-retired status. Following Garp's request, Rayleigh agrees to take the boy in. There are a few reasons why Rayleigh would accept the young Luffy as a protege. Firstly, he would be curious about the challenge. But more importantly, he would be driven by guilt for not doing more for his captain's son, Ace, and trying to rectify his sins through Luffy. So Luffy doesn't meet Sabo or Ace, and instead grows up on Sabo the Archipelago, learning Haki from a young age, and training in survival and philosophy under Rayleigh. During the time skip, just 2 years with Rayleigh was enough for Luffy to develop his Supreme King, Observation, and Armament Haki to advanced levels. Spending his entire childhood being tutored by the Dark King would make Luffy an unstoppable force by the time he's a teenager, meaning he would likely become a Yonko even earlier than the original timeline. Growing under Rayleigh's wing would not affect the Straw Hat Pirates too much, as Luffy's maturity and newfound skills would only motivate Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp to join him. However, Luffy may value Robin a bit more as a poneglyph reader and protect her more fiercely from the world government and CP9, as he has learned world history more thoroughly under Rayleigh. Perhaps the biggest change to the storyline comes in the Marineford arc, as Luffy arrives with stronger haki and a better battle sense. Even though the war would still end in victory for the Marines, Luffy might actually save Ace before escaping. Speaking of the Marineford War, what if Luffy was raised by the legendary pirate who actually put an end to it? Ever since Shanks saved Luffy's life, the red-haired pirate captain has been his idol and the level he aims to surpass. What if, instead of leaving Luffy in Fuchsia Village, Shanks took him along on his voyages? Being raised among the red-haired pirates would surely intensify Luffy's burning passion for freedom and adventure. Luffy has a wide range of mentors among the red-haired pirates, learning strategy from Ben Beckman, sharpshooting from Yasopp, and basic haki from Shanks himself. By the time he sets out on his own, Luffy is a haki prodigy, capable of basic conqueror's haki and advanced observation and armament haki. The changes to the regular timeline begin with the Arlong Park arc. Luffy's knowledge of Arlong from Shanks' connections lets him strategize ahead, meaning that he shows up in Arlong Park with a more comprehensive plan than just punching Arlong in the face. Nami is still moved by Luffy's emotional depth, but she now also respects his experience and allies herself faster. Once again, major changes would occur during the Marineford War, as Luffy will be able to communicate with Shanks and convince him to join the war much earlier. The arrival of the red-haired pirates would swiftly change the tide of battle, meaning that Ace and Whitebeard would probably survive the conflict. As a result, Luffy's goals during the time skip change considerably, as he's no longer forced to face his weakness and doesn't require Rayleigh's training. Instead, Luffy focuses on building a bigger pirate crew and claiming territory to carve his name into the new world. The real question in this alternate storyline is what growing up with Shanks will do to Luffy's personality. As we know, Shanks is a laid-back character who dislikes confrontation. If he manages to influence Luffy with this philosophy, it's likely that he becomes less aggressive in his pursuit of the title of the Pirate King and dismantling the world government. But whatever he loses in ambition, Luffy ends up gaining in chances of success. The reputation he earns as red-haired Shanks' protege will precede him, allowing him to rise to the rank of Yonko much earlier. There are few pirates that could rival Shanks, but Edward Newgate, more commonly known as Whitebeard, just happens to be one of them. In this scenario, Luffy joins Ace when he leaves to form his own pirate crew. However, as we see in the main storyline, the crew is absorbed into Whitebeard's crew after he defeats Ace. Growing up on the Moby Dick would be a wildly different experience than East Blue. Luffy would leave the peaceful village of Fuchsia at the age of 14, to be raised in the chaotic environment of Whitebeard's flagship alongside his many brothers. Whitebeard would be an ideal character to raise Luffy, as he's naturally a fatherly figure who treats his entire crew as his sons. Whitebeard himself would be the ultimate Oyaji, but commanders like Marco, Jozu, and Vista would be like uncles who help raise Luffy. Now, let's see how this changes the major arcs. The East Blue Saga likely never happens, and Luffy never meets Zoro, Nami, Sanji, or Usopp. Instead, he grows up on the New World Seas, already familiar with the most dangerous waters in the world. Luffy might find himself involved in the Alabasta Saga, if Whitebeard sends him on a covert mission to keep an eye on his old enemy, Crocodile. This would be Luffy's first big mission and a chance to prove himself. Rather than barely surviving, Whitebeard-trained Luffy would uncover Crocodile's plot and demolish him, having mastered haki from a young age. Being surrounded by so many Devil Fruit users, Luffy would also have unlocked Gear 4 by this point. The biggest divergence comes from the Summit War, as Luffy's observation and armament haki would help him hold off Akainu long enough to save Ace's life. The brothers would suffer heavy injuries but return to the Whitebeard crew alive. However, Whitebeard would still die following his battle with Teach. With Whitebeard gone, the New World Order would shift dramatically. In this timeline, rather than the Straw Hat Pirates emerging as a new force, we might see Luffy and Ace forming a new crew with the remnants of the Whitebeard Pirates. And that wraps up our collection of theories on Luffy's upbringing. As always, make sure you subscribe to never miss out on more One Piece theories and what-ifs.